There you go.
Hey, folks. Welcome, welcome. First thing I want to say, thank you so much for being here, everybody. It's a room full of colleagues, mentors, mentees, students, a lot of people that I know, a lot of people that I don't, new friends. Super excited to be here. Thank you, everybody, for the invite, the attendance, all this. We're ecstatic to be here. So today we want to talk a little bit about adversary emulation. Something a little bit buzzwordy, a little bit trendy, something you might have heard about recently, but maybe you don't know a lot about, and how you can get started with it for free. I think there's a big misconception in the realm of security that when you start getting into these deep technical realms, you yourself need to be deeply technical or it's tremendously expensive. And the reality is it's not. And so today we've got to talk to introduce some of the concepts around what is adversary emulation, as well as how you can get started doing this at home for free. Let's dive right in. We have two chapters to cover today. The first being understanding adversary emulation. We want to kind of set the baseline here, make sure everybody's on the same page. So let's start with a pretty familiar quote. You've probably seen this before, right? Sun Tzu, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Really important, guys, to understand the enemy so that you can inform your defenses, your strategy, right? This is not a new concept. This has gone back as far as history itself. So why would we stop now when it comes to cyber? Let's talk about it. So when we talk about adversary emulation, what is it really? In industry, I'd like to think that this really refers to a broad security discipline where we're replicating adversary behaviors to validate our cyber defenses against real world threats. So we're looking at what kind of threats do we actually face and how good are we at responding to them, right? Adversary emulation at its core, though, sounds really, really lofty. It's kind of difficult to understand. It can actually be broken down into a pretty simple process to get you started. The first being, we're going to start with cyber threat intelligence. Anybody heard that term before? CTI, cyber threat intelligence? Show of hands. So we're familiar. We're talking about actionable intelligence, things that tell us about things that we can do in this realm. We want to understand how threat actors are behaving, what kind of activities are they conducting when they're doing their malicious things. We want to get intelligence that lets us take action and build defenses around it. In the case of adversary emulation, we might want to take that a slightly different route and instead use that to build capabilities. So for testing purposes, call it detection engineering, call it security testing, validation, whatever you want to call it. We're going to take that actionable CTI, the stuff that tells us how threat actors are behaving, and we're going to translate that into a capability that we have that we can run a test with. Then we're going to test. And why are we testing? Well, commonly to identify gaps, kind of a high-level goal. We might want to find out where are we well prepared, where are we well equipped to deal with the threats that we might face. But we also might want to know where are we not currently well prepared so that we can patch that up. So really, adversary emulation at its core comes down to these three steps. Collect your CTI, understand your adversary, build your capabilities out to test according to that CTI, replicate your adversary behaviors, and then execute your tests in whatever context you need, whether it's for the detection engineering, the hunting, whatever you want to do, testing your tools, testing your vendors, go for it. Now, something you guys might be familiar with, anybody here heard of MITRE attack? Okay, so lots of people familiar with this. This is good. MITRE attack is like the periodic table of bad guy behaviors. Okay, that's how I like to describe it. I come from an analytical toxicology background, so I think it's a good way to sum this up. Up on the slides here, you're going to see there is a sprawling matrix. Okay, I don't want you to focus on that right now. The point is it's really big. There's a lot of information here. You don't need to memorize this. Nobody does. What you should know is that MITRE attack is a framework to help you bridge the gap on communicating on and understanding adversary behaviors. And we can use this to inform our actionable cyber threat intelligence, okay? This is a great way to use standardized common language, plain language to translate adversary behaviors into something that you or other people at your workplace or for your student projects or whatever your use case is can use to, again, build your capabilities and do your testing, right? In the MITRE attack framework, adversaries are broken down their behavior specifically into kind of 3 levels of categorization. You have tactics, techniques, and procedures. And you'll see that acronym commonly written as a TTP. A TTP is used kind of interchangeably to describe one of those behaviors. The highest level of this framework, you have kind of the objectives, the goals, the very high order thinking of how an adversary is behaving. So you'll see things like initial access or reconnaissance. They're very summative, and they're meant to be kind of that top level bucket where everything falls into. One level lower, you're going to have techniques, right? There's lots of different ways to crack an egg. So if we're talking about, dumping passwords, there's a ton of different ways to do it. We want to be able to differentiate, though, how are we actually doing it? So, while you might have password dumping as a technique, there are probably multiple ways to do it. That's where procedures come into play. And where you're talking about really the lowest level of the framework, you're talking about the implementation, how people are actually doing the thing. If you understand a TTP, you can probably build a pretty good capability to replicate it in a closed test environment, which if you're using it for detection engineering, or if you're using it for any of your internal use cases, it's a pretty good starting point. MITRE, fantastic resource. Most importantly, in the spirit of this talk, this stuff is all super free. I'll say it again, it is completely free. You can go online, you can pull out the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, you can investigate, dig deep. I encourage you to take a look at this after the talk. This could be a talk all in and of itself. So spend some time here, folks. It's super cool. As a related call out, you might have seen the DEFEND framework. It is a related and sort of corresponding library of cyber countermeasures. I'm not going to spend as much time on DEFEND, but as it's, I guess, a relatively newer thing, and not a lot of people are as familiar with it, I encourage you to take a look. It's a great introduction to sort of the realm of the cyber countermeasures and, associating with the commonly understood MITRE ATT&CK. Let's talk a little bit about a case study, something that we had come in. So I'm a manager of cyber defense at KPMG. I see a lot of security testing come through onto my desk. One of these things, we had a client who came to us in a bit of a tizzy around the time that Conti leaks happened. Anybody remember Conti leaks? So Conti leaks, there was a pretty big leak involving a lot of the information about how the Conti ransomware group was operating at the time. And notably, a lot of information about how their sort of business worked was leaked, also about how they conducted their operations. So there was a ton of security advisories. There was lots of sort of public source or open source leaks. Some of the documents were even translated. Anyway, so we had a client who came to us and they said, hey, we know Conti isn't operating anymore, but we're really concerned about kind of the next generation of ransomware affiliate groups. And we want to understand, how do our defenses really stack up to this? Are we prepared for if one of these guys comes after us? And so we built a purple team exercise kind of on short notice. So the goal was simply test and validate the client's defenses against ransomware operator TTPs. So we understand how ransomware groups work. We want to figure out how well prepared are they to deal with them if one comes knocking. In the end, we actually had a pretty interesting test, right? So we found, a lot of it was detected or prevented, but actually 2 key things kind of came up, and it wouldn't have come up if we didn't actually do the adversary behavior and simulate, for one, data exfiltration. So we were able to highlight a pretty big gap in the client's infrastructure in terms of their DLP, their data loss protection or data leakage protection tooling. Didn't have any coverage as far as sensitive data goes. So we were able to exfiltrate sensitive data out of the environment to like a mega folder, which was kind of cool. The other thing that we were able to highlight was actually a major misconfiguration with their EDR tool, right? So this is a client who they had a pretty decent security spend. They had a good security stack. In fact, a leading EDR tool, but it wasn't configured properly. And so it was monitoring PowerShell for, command inputs, malicious stuff. That was fine, but it wasn't monitoring CMD. So we were able to execute the same data exfiltration test case using the same malicious tool on CMD where it was blocked by the EDR in PowerShell. So if not for thinking like the adversary and understanding they might try this, we would never have found that, weird misconfiguration gap in the security visibility into their org. So to call back to Conti leaks, one way that we did this, we actually looked for some actionable CTI. I mentioned there was leaks around the operator manuals and sort of how they did their stuff. We kind of took that to the next level and built an exercise themed around it. So you can see, looks like a spreadsheet. I promise it's not death by spreadsheet. It's not one of those presentations. But we took those operator manuals and actually built out some full comprehensive capabilities. This is one of our sort of internal reference testing sheets. We took the operator manual line by line, found a translated version of it, and migrated it into a format where we were able to customize these commands and these tools and build this into a test case that we could run in the client environment, right? So this is the real bad guy stuff. This is what they're doing in a client environment when they're in there. So we took their literal manual, turned it into an exercise. That's adversary emulation, right? Replicate their behavior in your context. So you guys might be wondering now, okay, that's really cool, fun purple team story, haha. But why should you care? Well, I think the big thing is that adversary emulation is kind of growing, right? In two areas. First being the community effort. So there is a lot of open source resources, a lot of community effort, a lot of sort of industry-wide support for purple teaming. Highly, highly recommend that you dig in here because, yeah, there's a lot of support here. For one, we have a couple of things driving this. One being collaboration between public and private sector as far as threat intelligence goes. You guys ever seen a CISA advisory or an advisory from the CSE here in Canada or anything like that? These kinds of public sector, private sector collaborations are increasingly common. And we have lots of vendors here, regionally, even in Canada, that are supporting these kinds of advisories and publications to prevent the proliferation of ransomware and cybercrime and the like. So that's one kind of driver here. Another thing is, of course, the resourcing, right? So MITRE attack, long-standing. I think it's ATT&CK next week. Register. It looks like it's going to be really cool. They're celebrating 10 years. There are a lot of resources like MITRE attack that are now focused on adversary emulation. They're bridging the gap, the knowledge gap between sort of what you see as the dark arts and what everybody else is doing in security, right? And then beyond that, it's not just knowledge, it is tooling. There is a wealth of open source and free tooling that is available to get you started. So today, in the spirit of this talk, we're talking about how really we have more access to information about adversaries than ever before, and it is entirely free. So the other thing that I kind of want to touch on, so maybe from a management consulting lens, working Big Four, we work with a lot of financial institutions, we work with a lot of small, medium businesses, we do a whole myriad of clients. There are some other pushes in the industry, like, for example, regulatory involvement or client recognition in this case, that are kind of driving adoption of adversary emulation as a practice or as kind of a goal. A recent example of this, anybody here familiar with the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, OSFI, here in Canada? Okay, a lot of people raising their hands. We like those guys. Maybe, yeah, we like them. So OSFI recently published an intelligence-led cyber resilience testing framework that was pretty heavily informed by CBEST and Tiber EU, other existing regulatory frameworks talking about augmented red teaming, where you're using cyber threat intelligence to go above and beyond what you'd call conventional red teaming or pen testing, and you're adding in a layer of realism, right? So they want us to be using information about our adversaries and the threats we face to improve the realism and the efficacy of our testing. We're also seeing increasing appetite, at least in the client base, around sort of the adoption of adversary emulation as a best practice, right? It's kind of being recognized as innovative, even though it's been around for a while, as kind of a leading practice or something that now, because they have the security maturity in the organization, they're well equipped to take on. So there's a little bit more sort of client appetite there for sure. I think another thing that has really kind of come into focus recently as well is evaluating your service providers. Right, so it's one thing to be looking at your tooling or your own capabilities as far as your security stack goes, but we've had a lot of clients who've come in and said, hey, we're working with an MSSP, a managed security services provider of some sort, and we want to understand what their capabilities really are. If you run one of these tests in our environment, are they going to pick up on it? Can they see what you're doing? And what are they going to catch? What's going to slip through? What do we need to prepare for? So kind of another interesting topic area, I guess, in the age of services, and as we kind of move in that direction there. Another kind of, I guess, benefit is as far as a lot of these engagements and services are delivered, they tend to be a little bit cheaper than what you might call sort of conventional testing and conventional approaches. Because you're focused really only on a specific adversary or a specific set of objectives, it is much more narrowly defined, which means you can kind of keep costs a little bit lower as you're building and scoping these exercises. It does definitely help to keep this relatively inexpensive. The bottom line is conventional approaches as far as pen testing and red teaming go, they're not really cutting it anymore, right? We have all this information, so why wouldn't we use it? So again, we've talked a little bit of the cost of this stuff. You guys are wondering now, I'm sure, isn't this expensive, right? Well, the answer, no. Not really. You can get started for free. This is true. I'm not lying. We're actually going to show you how. I'm going to hand things over to Cristian here in a couple of minutes. I will say, commercial tooling for this stuff definitely can be expensive, but it's worth its while. getting started for free. Today, we're gonna, walk you through a little bit of a lab demo, and actually we prepared a bit of a write-up for you for how to build an adversary emulation home lab. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. I'll hand things over to Cristian here to get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Todd. All right. So as Todd had mentioned, we had gone through all that. And now, now that we understand the context and the need for adversary emulation, now you're asking, how do I build one? And that's what this part is going to be covering. And one of the things that, our friend Sun Tzu is here to give us is that he who does not build a home lab shall lose his homeland. Keep in mind, this may not be historically accurate. I'm not entirely sure, but okay, home lab requirements. So one of the big spooky things with technology as it increases is that there's more demand for resources. So sure, if you're running it locally, and in this case, this is the one that we're going to be running the infrastructure that we have off of, which will just be run off of a VirtualBox / VMware host. We have two separate areas, our CorpNet infrastructure, which is going to have a Splunk and Debian server, our Windows Server domain controller, and a Windows 10 workstation. So kind of like a small little corporate environment that we've set up. And then on the other hand, we've also set up our Debian C2 server and a Kali Linux virtual host. So this seems like a lot, especially if you have just maybe an okay laptop at home and you can't maybe use your work laptop. So the thing is, this is just maybe one of the things that you're going to worry about as you start getting into it later. You don't have to do anything this complex. And in fact, some people even have even more complex than that. You can drop this down to pretty much just a Windows 10 workstation that can run Splunk. And you honestly don't even need a domain controller. And then on top of that C2 server, you can run all this off of your own Kali Linux host. So with that being said, with just those two PCs, you can get as low as 8 GB of RAM, probably just a decent sized hard drive, and maybe even like a 2-core processor. So kind of anything that you could do off a random MacBook. And even if you don't have a laptop that still can run that, a lot of cloud services are available. Never have they seen before. And on top of that is it's probably going to be a lot cheaper than buying yourself a new laptop. So in our case, we're going to be running with at least 16 GB of RAM, 250 SSD. The reason why I recommend an SSD is hard drives don't like it when you run 5 machines at once. I learned that the hard way when I was building this lab. I think it took maybe like 10 minutes for our Debian server is entirely CLI, and it took like 5-10 minutes to boot up then, which I never knew that it could go that slow, but all right. So moving on to the demo, and we're going to pray that it does not break. One of the things that I want you guys to maybe take an opportunity to is take a picture or scan it. We'll have this available later on our social media, LinkedIn, whatever, when we show it at the end. But this QR code will actually take you to Todd's Medium article where we talk about building the adversary emulation lab. Why are we not building it right now? Well, Kali Linux takes about 30 minutes alone to install. So I don't think you guys want to sit here through lunch just waiting for, a pop-up every 5 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly share our screen there and get all that ready. Let me just change our display. All right, perfect. And you guys are able to see that just fine, right? All right, awesome. So pretty much this is going to be Caldera, one of the tools that we personally like to get started with, entirely free. So for some context, Caldera is an adversary emulation framework that is developed by MITRE, the same organization that Todd had mentioned earlier. And the great thing is with Caldera is it pretty much runs off of a client-server model. You'll have your agents, which you're able to deploy to hosts, and then Caldera itself will act as the C2 framework, except that it's very interactive and it has a lot of features that you guys are probably going to be excited to see about, especially for something that's free. And in fact, actually, for who here came to DEF CON this year? So, okay, nice. So a decent bit of people. If you stop by the ICS Village, one of the things that MITRE did is that they showed up and they had actually introduced that they also have OT capabilities in Caldera as well. So maybe if you, for some reason, have like a windmill that you can test some TTPs on, you also have that ability to test it on as well. So starting off with the agents, this is going to be what you're going to be deploying onto the host. And this is what will be allowing you to pretty much have a connection with it. So deploying a Caldera agent is honestly extremely easy. So if we just go here and we choose, for example, a ragdoll host, is you'll have the opportunity to do maybe Linux and Mac. If you want to try some of the other ones, you also have Windows opportunity as well. And it's as simple as honestly just copying a couple of commands and just pasting it onto your host. I'll even show you guys right now a demonstration of how fast this can work. So we'll grab our little machine here, paste in one of the commands from earlier, and just like that, we will have an agent deployed. And there we go, just that simple. So now that we have an agent, what do we do with it? On its own, it's not going to do anything, but that's where you come in. So abilities. One of the words that Todd had mentioned earlier was TTPs. TTPs are going to be important to Caldera. And in fact, if you take a look at these, is we have a collection of what's called atomic red team tools. So these are something that's created by Red Canary as an organization, a separate tool that's also open source and integrated into Caldera. So you have a collection of over 1,000 TTPs that are already pre-built to you that are aligned with MITRE attack. So in case to translate that is pretty much that saves you a lot of development time. And on top of that, you also have the opportunity where you're able to pretty much start building adversary frameworks in a bit. So just to show you an examples, we have one threat actor group here called Wicked Panda. This is also available on MITRE where they have these kind of types of spreadsheets available. And you can pretty much just take a look at the techniques that each adversary group uses and the ones that they're most likely to execute. So now that you know that is maybe you're thinking, okay, but what if they have one that isn't aligned on Atomic Red Team, or maybe if Caldera doesn't have it? Caldera allows you to build your own agents or your own abilities as well. So you can kind of just take it through it. It's very simple. You just kind of put the name, the tactic, and whatever to it, and then you'll run it using a command shell. So you could do Linux shell, you could do Python, you can do all the way over here with Windows is PowerShell, native, and a couple of other things as well. So individual TTPs, maybe it might not seem that great to run on its own. Caldera has a solution for that as well, and that's with the adversary profiles. So with the adversary profiles is these allow you to create a collection of TTPs that can be run. Starting off, as I've already got one that's pre-built for you, just kind of one that runs 3 discovery commands that are emulated from Wicked Panda, which is a well-known threat actor group. And we have probably just a collection of 5 ones just to run with you really quickly today. And pretty much what you're able to do is you're able to reorganize them. You're able to have all these TTPs ready, and you're able to kind of create an adversary profile. So what you see in here, you can condense all the way into Caldera, and you're able to have an emulation of a threat actor group. So how do you use this? This is where operations comes in. So really quickly is what we're going to do is we're going to create an operation just by clicking that. You can put it adversary test is what we'll call it. And here's where I start praying that the profile is going to work. I ran this thing like 5 times here. But so the way it works is pretty simple, is you press start and it does all the work for you. You can think of it almost like hands-free hacking. But of course, it's more than that. It is threat-informed defense. And while this runs, I want to show you guys something over here. Our Splunk instance shows that this isn't just about attacking. This isn't just about emulating a threat actor group. It's about threat-informed defense. And you're able to have this opportunity with your home lab where you're able to go ahead, install this for free. Sometimes with licenses, it depends, but main thing is this is all running on free things. And you're able to go ahead and check out and say, oh, hey, clear history, that seems a little bit weird. And pretty much all of this stuff that you can use in Jest is this allows you to create an effective purple team environment where you're able to truly learn about adversary emulation. So going on here is the way that it runs is you'll see 3 different states. Is you'll see collect, success, and failure. Collect is going to be that it's currently running the command. Success means that you didn't get told to try harder. And if it shows up in failed, sometimes it tells you to try harder. So I'll get to that one in a moment here, but you can go ahead and view your commands to see what's being run. And then you can also press view output. So that way you can take a look and see what it produces. The great thing is with Caldera is what's being produced, you can also move some of this data into variables as well. This allows you to create something that's actually very emulated and something that's as hands-free as possible. So that way you don't have to start from scratch. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a look, view SMB share. So, and then if we move over to our Splunk instance, I believe that you will get some of this ready. So I know that we're at 11:55 and it's going to take some time for some of this stuff to run. So if you also have any questions, feel free to raise them up and we will answer them as we go on.
Maybe while this runs in the background, I can field some questions if anybody has any. I think this kind of concludes the talk. So thank you for listening in, folks. Appreciate everybody being here. Any questions before we let everybody out of here for some food? I see in the pink shirt. Yeah, go for it. In this case, I believe it's deployed on Debian, and in the Medium article, you'll see it written up on how to install it on a Ubuntu 22.04 system. The version of it?
It's running for Debian. It's running Bookworm, so that would be Debian 12. Oh.
Of the Splunk install? I think it's 911
yeah,
something.
It actually has it like right at the top here as well.
Yeah.
Splunk 911.
Yeah. Well, hey, no silly questions here. Yeah, I think it might even just be a browser theme thing. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, we like dark mode. We like having our
exactly.
site.
We don't want to flashbang ourselves here.
So also really quickly as well as so we finished our SSH brute force as well. So while it looks like it's telling you to try harder, one of the things I want to focus on is you get one of the standard outputs of true, which tells us something interesting is happening. And we're just going to wait for our output file. This is running against the domain controller with some of the IP addresses that we had collected from earlier. And if we give it probably 3, 2, 1, all right, we have login successful on administrator with BSides TL. So if you could tell, there's probably multiple instances of the same thing. It's just because it appends to the file. I ran this like 6 times, just making sure it didn't, tell us to try hard in the middle of the presentation. And if you would like to connect with us as well, there are QR codes to our LinkedIn. And if you're cool and like using Discord, you can also reach us there as well. Thank you guys so much for this presentation.